Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Gaya Gamhewage from the World Health Organization, coming to you from our main studios in Geneva, Switzerland. Today we're joining you on our social media live, and thank you for joining, to talk about a profoundly disturbing topic, the topic of violence against women. And we talk on this topic to you today, not just because it's such a pervasive, prevalent public health problem, but because we are also in a period called the 16 days of activism against violence against women. And this is a number of days where we really use the advocacy spotlight to talk about this often secret, hidden public health problem. And to talk this through with me is a very, very valued and dear colleague, Dr. Avni Amin, who leads WHO's work in this area. Welcome, Avni.
Thank you very much, Gaya. It's a pleasure to be here.
So while it is a very deep and dark topic, we have to grasp the extent of it, and but really do it in a way that we address this problem. This is not new. This has been in our societies for millennia. So, Avni, tell us, how widespread is violence against women today, and what do the numbers really tell us?
So last week, WHO launched a new round of violence against women prevalence estimates. And what the study shows is that violence against women occurs pretty much in every country, every society. The prevalence varies. However, globally we know that 1 in 3, or nearly 840 million women, are experiencing physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or sexual violence by someone other than the partner. We think that this is an underestimate because there's so much stigma around this topic that many women may not report it.
So, I mean, these are massive numbers, 800 million plus, and 1 in 3. Tell me, what are these numbers getting better, worse? I know we are tracking them.
So we published the first round of estimates in 2021, that is the first round in the Sustainable Development Goals era from 2015 to 2013. In 2021, these numbers were pretty similar. WHO also published estimates from about 80 countries in 2013. And what we know now is tracking data across these three studies. They're not strictly comparable, so the latest round of estimates replace all previous estimates because the data quality is getting better. But we did try to look at trends, and what we found is that there has been very, very little progress in the last 20 years, a mere 0.2% decline, annual decline in intimate partner violence alone.
So, you know, when I asked you this question, because I knew this answer, but I wanted you to tell our audiences, this is absolutely outrageous. If there was any other public health problem where, we could not move the needle for 20 years, right? This is a generation, we could not move the needle. We would not accept it. But because it's women who are affected, and women continue their lives living with violence, it really is something I want all of us to understand how prevalent and pervasive it is. So, numbers are heartbreaking, numbers are dramatic, but they don't tell the whole story, right? And many women, victims, survivors suffer in silence, and they go about their daily work, they go to work, they care for their children, they earn a living. A lot of hidden trauma goes unseen. Can you talk a little bit about this, the hidden nature of this?
So violence against women has often and in many cases been tolerated or normalized or condoned or justified in society. People think that women should just accept violence as part of being women. So what results in this is that women don't speak up. They keep it hidden. They suffer in silence for a very, very long time. It causes a lot of trauma on them. We know that, of course, there are physical consequences when you have sexual or physical violence, bruises, etc. But the emotional scars are quite painful. So many women experience a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, depression. In some settings, there's increased use of alcohol and substance use as a coping mechanism. Their children suffer. We know that when children are exposed to their mothers being abused, there is in fact some interesting brain science done that shows that there's a lot of trauma impact on their brains. They think that this kind of behavior is normal, so they grow up either more likely to perpetrate violence or more likely to accept this form of violence. We also know that this violence has economic consequences. There's loss of productivity, loss of livelihood. Women face insecure housing if they have to go to a shelter. And of course, for governments, there are economic consequences.
And I think, and maybe this is a good moment to take a breath and say that some of this, because it is so prevalent, 1 in 3 of us have experienced this. Maybe you could talk a little about how this could be triggering for others, and if people who are listening are feeling that this is very difficult to hear, although we're not going to talk about individual cases, please take a breath, move away from the screen, and don't force yourself to sit through this. Is there anything else, Avni, that people could do if they're triggered by this?
Sure. I mean, I think we have to recognize that violence is not just happening out there in societies to other people, it's amongst all of us. And I think that all of us, when we have and experience these forms of trauma, we need to take care of our emotional well-being. So feel free to step out. There are many stress management exercises, deep breathing, and things that we actually can do in our daily lives that can help us get over that moment in time. And of course, depending on where you're living, there are resources and support services for women experiencing domestic abuse that are available, that can be accessed. Sometimes it's your hospital where you might have a trained healthcare provider you can talk to.
And just picking up on your last point, leaving an abusive relationship is not easy. And in fact, it could be one of the most difficult decision a woman has to make, because it impacts her children, herself, her whole family, culture, expectations, financial dependence, all of this. So can you just talk us through, and I think we should understand this and have empathy for this. Can you just talk us through some of the factors that really make it hard for women to leave abusive situations? Because staying in abusive situations sometimes is seen as compliance or acceptance, but you can be in a very abusive relationship and you're neither agreeing to this or complying to this, but you have no choice. Just talk us through that a little bit.
So one of the things I think is recognizing that women are socialized. They're socialized to make relationships work. They're socialized to make marriages work. They're socialized to make things work for their children. But not only that, for many women, leaving is not an option if they don't have financial support or financial autonomy. They may be concerned about their children's health and well-being. They may not have social support from their family members to leave an abusive relationship. And one of the things that the data show, which is a bit frightening, is actually the point at which women decide to leave, when they make that choice, is one of the most dangerous moments, because that's perhaps the time when the perpetrator gets insecure and may actually act in a way that puts her and her children's life in danger.
And I'm sure, as I know, as I'm listening and other people are listening, this could really make us think about the very difficult situations that are either in our own lives or around us. Also, I take a breath now just to invite our viewers. We have people on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of our social media platforms. Thank you for joining. Please give in your comments, ask your questions. And I see that things are already coming in. There's a comment on LinkedIn that says GBV, gender-based violence, is in fact rampant for both men and women this century, some caused by unbearable economic problems. Talk a little bit about what we know about who is at the receiving end of violence and sexual violence.
So most people who experience this gendered form of violence are disproportionately women and girls. However, there are settings where men and particularly young boys can be subjected to sexual abuse. I think, and that is extremely stigmatizing because often that form of sexual abuse against boys is not recognized. There's a sense that, boys are supposed to uphold a sense of masculinity, and rape or sexual abuse is seen as a way to humiliate them and make them seem less masculine and more feminine. So it does happen. However, in many settings, and particularly in the homes, women are the ones who will experience violence in a setting that is supposed to be their safe haven, their safe space. Men, of course, experience violence in very public settings. There's a lot of conflict, gang violence, homicides that men suffer from disproportionately. But the drivers of that violence are very different than what women experience.
And, in my previous life, when I worked with community-based organizations, in certain cultures, the purity or virginity is valued in girls. So boys tend to be more sexually abused, and often by family members or other, adults whom they trust. So yes, as we said, this is hidden, but currently what we see, particularly in domestic situations, is that women are predominantly the victims and survivors, and men are perpetrators. That's what we see. But again, this is also something we have to break, because men and women need to come together to address this. And thank you for touching on how we are socialized, what the norms are, and the stigma, the difficulty in bringing this to a surface. Thank you for those of you who are sending in questions, and let's talk a little bit about this question. What specific global health indicators should be prioritized to better measure, predict, and ultimately prevent violence against women? And how can the World Health Organization ensure this data are transformed into actionable, enforceable policies in different legal systems? So there's a lot to unpack there. So let's look at, what should we be really looking at? What can we do to take information and data and turn that into something that makes a difference and a dent in this massive problem?
So the first question around data is that we have the SDG target 5.2, which is on eliminating violence against women and girls.
And just to translate that, that's what all the world, all countries and agencies have agreed is a standard, right? And we agreed a long time ago that we would 2015, so 10 years ago, that we would all collectively work towards this, right?
Yes. And the target for the SDGs to be achieved by 2030 is 0 cases of violence against women and girls, which is elimination, right? Now, there are 2 indicators in the SDG 5.2 target that we are measuring. One is an indicator on prevalence of physical or sexual or psychological partner violence in the past 12 months. The second prevalence indicator is non-partner sexual violence in the past 12 months. Now, WHO has data drawn from surveys that are being conducted in these countries, and in fact, the estimates that we produced last week, we have data from 168 countries for prevalence of intimate partner violence and 140 countries for non-partner sexual violence. So we are tracking this indicator for the SDGs, and what it tells us is exactly where we are at any given moment in addressing this. We have data for all of these countries in the report, just to say that the data on non-partner sexual violence, because it is a much more stigmatized form of violence, are actually less robust than the domestic or intimate partner violence. Now, how these data are actually useful is that when countries collect this data and they make this data public, it actually generates a public discourse. For many people, this is the first time they realize that a slap is not just a slap, it's a form of violence. You label it. For many women who disclose this violence, it's for the first time that the silence has been lifted and they realize that what's happening to them is actually not a normal behavior by a loving partner, but actually a form of abuse. So that in itself actually raises awareness. The second thing it does is that these numbers prevent governments from looking away. It prevents governments from saying, oh, this doesn't happen here. When they actually are confronted with the sheer volume or the prevalence of violence, they have to take it much, much more seriously. So when countries like Thailand, Namibia, other countries like Maldives have collected these survey data, it has actually led to public discourse. It has actually led to bills being tabled or bills being amended in these countries to actually protect women.
So numbers are very powerful, and it makes it difficult for individuals, communities, cultures, and governments to say it doesn't happen here. And that really is the first step, because this is often pushed under the carpet, put into a black back closet. But as you said, 160 plus countries are now reporting. So that's absolutely amazing. But let's take another couple of questions. Earlier you were talking about the impact on children, right? The children in household where there is violence. Talk a little bit about the impact on children. You did mention it before. How do we sometimes, we can see behavioral differences in children, and that gives us an insight. Talk a little bit about that. And I know in the report there were also numbers about how many teenagers, young girls and young women of 15 to 19, how this is not just, this is already starting at quite a young age. Talk to us about children and teenagers.
First, I'll just tell you a little bit from that report what we found, which actually, even in the previous round, we had shown that adolescent girls, violence actually starts very early in the life of adolescent girls. So by the time girls are 20, a quarter of them have experienced violence in a lifetime. And in this round, we also showed that 16% have experienced violence, intimate partner violence, just in the past 12 months alone. That translates to 12.5 million ever partnered teenagers. And one of the big risk factors for teenagers and for adolescent girls to experience this violence is child marriage. It's also lack of education, or not being deprived of educational opportunities. Now, children, when they are younger, they may witness their mothers being beaten, and they suffer trauma. They experience depression, they experience stress. There are behavioral problems in school. Girls and boys, yes. Yeah. Girls and boys, and many of them have problems in school. They actually may be victims of abuse from the father themselves. They may be caught in the crossfire between the parents and get injured themselves. In some settings, there is co-occurrence, or what we say, if the mother is being beaten by the father, the child is also being abused by the father. There's also higher levels of what we call corporal punishment of children in those homes, because it is a home where violence is sort of the way lives, and it's the way they settle conflict, or they manage or don't manage anger, I should say. So I think that this is an effect that happens both on mothers but also on children. And most importantly, we have to break the cycle by making sure that children who are exposed to violence are supported, and they know that this is not the way in which we can continue to behave. Because if you want to break that cycle, you have to teach children how to settle conflicts and communicate in a more respectful way.
Yeah, and you said earlier, there are many ways this could go. You grow up in a house of violence. You're more likely to experience violence yourself. Sometimes you could be more likely to perpetrate violence on others. And of course, there are also there are instances where there is the right kind of support, the right kind of reaction, and you emerge out of this, and that breaking that cycle of violence.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that it is not inevitable that if you've been abused as a child, that you will grow up to either perpetrate or experience violence. There are many things that actually can help children break out of that cycle: nurturing relationships, strong peer networks, supporting them, psychologically. All of these can actually help. There are interventions that WHO recommends to help children around parenting support, which can help them, cope with the exposure and abuse themselves.
And I've also come face to face with, and I know you work with them too, about masculinity education. How with young boys, there is a way to socialize them, to break this cycle, to socialize them differently, to not to resolve conflict and differences in different ways, and also understand how gender norms are affecting their reaction to any situation. But some of the signs are very subtle, right? It may not be physical violence. It may start off as a very controlling relationship where the woman doesn't have access to money, is not able to take decisions about herself or her family. So these can be very subtle things that we don't see as warning signs of maybe violence in the bedroom, but also violence down the road to come. So it really is a societal issue. It's not a medical or a clinical issue. And but as you said a very important word. It's prevalent, but it's not inevitable. I have a couple of thank you for all of those who are writing in. So maybe Adib Kamil says on X, at WHO, spot on. Eliminating violence against women is a global imperative. We agree. It's very personal to women who are experiences, but it is a global imperative. Let's turn awareness into action, educate, enforce laws, and empower survivors. Grateful for spaces like this to amplify the call. So I thank you so much for that solidarity. Naima on LinkedIn says, sometimes staying isn't compliance. I totally agree with you, Naima. It is the only way she knows to stay alive. And that speaks to the role we all have about, helping women understand their situation, move on from this situation. But it is a very complicated thing to leave an abusive relationship. On Facebook, Chris writes, mental health is important. In my first relationship, I was so worried about cheating and her loving me that I did not see I was pushing her away. Eventually, the relationship failed due to my mental health. I was too possessive. What is the link between mental health and violence against women from the perpetrator point of view? Thank you, Chris, for that question. Do you want to just reflect on that?
Yeah, so I think violence and mental health, we say, is a bidirectional relationship. Definitely, women who experience violence have much higher rates of depression, anxiety, and in the case of sexual assault, there's post-traumatic stress disorder. We also know, and this is not universal, but I think it is important to recognize that men's own mental health is a contributing risk factor to perpetration of violence, as is men's use of alcohol and substance use. However, and I always say this, what is really important is to recognize that the root cause of perpetration of violence is gender norms. It's the sense of privilege, male privilege and entitlement, and mental health may just be a contributing risk factor to perpetration of violence.
But sometimes addressing and getting help for that mental health condition could actually clarify would at least create self-awareness on the part of the perpetrator. So again, this is not about just laws. It is really about self-awareness, but support for our health in a holistic way. Right? That, again, there's stigma for men to access mental health services. We know that. Right? So all of these things are contributors, and it's really interesting to have this conversation. And I'm particularly happy to have men on this call, and men and boys, because that's where the conversation needs to start. I think historically women lead this work, but it must be led by everybody. Then on Facebook, Jennifer says, how can communities better support women survivors of gender-based violence? Can you talk about top 2-3 things that communities can do?
I would say listen to them with empathy and without judging. Ask them what they want to do, because it's really important to center it around what women want to do. They are the best ones who know their situation, their safety, what is good for them and what they can and cannot do. And then support them based on what they ask you for. If they want to be referred to a service, then that's what you help them do. The other thing you can do is speak out and actually say this is never acceptable. It is never a woman's fault for inviting violence. The choice is made by the perpetrator. And often when people say, but you know, when a man gets angry, isn't that normal? And I say, well, a man can get angry at their boss. Does that mean that they hit them? No. They know how to self-regulate and control themselves. The reason they do it with women is because they think that that is, they're going to get away with it, right? Or that nobody's going to hold them accountable, or that this is the way men should be treating all women. So I think that that's something we all have a role to play out, and also in our own homes and families and with our friends and peers, we can play a big role in just saying sexism is not okay. A joke against women, demeaning women, putting them down is what I call is the bottom of the iceberg. Often violence happens where the bottom of the iceberg is a general, exactly, a general sense that it's okay to demean women, it's okay to dismiss women, it's okay to humiliate them. And so we have to actually call those behaviors out, and we have to raise our sons and daughters equally. We have to teach them that strength lies not in hurting, but in respecting all individuals equally and in resolving conflicts in a non-violent way.
That's really helpful. And Jennifer actually has given us some suggestions as well. She says, please let's also start education in rural areas. A lot of women don't know that they are right and they're suffering in their marriage. Absolutely. But actually this is so prevalent in every class, in urban, rural, everywhere. And as you said, so on the one hand, it is gendered behavior, but it's also gendered behavior sometimes by women, because I come from quite a traditional background, and mothers-in-law, older women might tell a younger wife, a younger woman who's just married, and that's just the way men are. You need to be patient. So in a way, we all perpetuate these really unhealthy norms, right? But it is by talking about this, and we do it to keep the peace. Sometimes people do it because it's always been done like this. So really understanding how gender and social norms and normalization of this contributes and leads to death sometimes. This is not just something women live with. Women die from this. And we shouldn't forget that, right? But that's not all. I mean, even if also perpetrators know how to keep abusing without destroying completely the woman. And many other things happen to a person living with violence. Do you want to talk about just the consequences of violence beyond the physical on women?
Yes, I think the physical and mental health ones I've already spoken about, but for many women it leads to perhaps they can't go to school, they can't perhaps go to work, there's a lot of missed work. They may not be able to advance their careers if they're constantly suffering from the consequences of violence. They may not be able to participate in public life. We know that violence now is targeted against women in public life, leaders, parliamentarians, people who are celebrities. So they may not be able to actually carry out those responsibilities. And what it does is it actually ends up with a society in which women are just kept more and more hidden because of the violence that they're suffering.
And being the subject of violence, it not only breaks your bones and bruises you, it takes away from who you are as a person and how you see yourself as a person and what you're able to accomplish. So in a way, it's not just the woman or the family, but all of society misses out on the potential of women,
Yeah.
right? Because how you see yourself fundamentally changes when someone hits you. It changes your self-image so profoundly. So I think, there is so much statistics don't show, and it's so important to have this conversation. Also, maybe very quickly before we move on to the theme of this year's topic, which is technology and abuse via technology, there are certain situations where this is even more prevalent, right? We know certain things happen in the world, and particularly women become more susceptible to violence and sexual violence. Can you just tell us where some of these situations are?
So our data actually show that the highest prevalence of violence, well over 30 and 40%, in some cases reaching 52%, is in countries which we call the small island developing states, Oceania, so Asia Pacific island countries, excluding Australia and New Zealand, of course, and then countries which have very high levels of poverty, that are classified as the least developed countries by the UN SDG, and countries which have vulnerability due to climate and conflict and crises. And these are conditions which actually increase the exposure to violence. These are settings where insecurity, economic insecurity, leads to a lot of tension in the house, which leads to conflicts and violence. It leads to displacement, which actually puts women at risk of violence when there's
refugees, conflict situations.
Yeah. Yep. Then in the case of climate, and people ask me what's the link, and I always say, well, think about what climate does. Either it has flooding or drought. What does it do to women who have to go miles and miles in search of firewood or water? It makes them extremely exposed and vulnerable to predators. So these are the contexts in which violence rates are increasing. And the world is seeing much, much more of humanitarian crises, much more rise in insecurities due to conflicts and crises.
Absolutely. I was in a internally displaced camp. Actually, it was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, I think about a year and a half ago, and I spoke with women and who were displaced because of actually an earthquake and then constant conflict. And they were saying, they were picking leaves and berries because there was nothing to eat, and suddenly a group of men came and basically said, you can be beaten up and raped, or you can be quietly raped. And then they survived this, and they were in a camp and they had to exchange sex for getting a basin of water, getting an allocation of food. So there's a big spectrum of how terrible this is, and it is very difficult to speak about and to listen to, but I think when we surface this, that becomes the first step. So let's go to where people are today. They're on social media platforms and internet, and this year's theme for this week is about violence, online violence. Talk to us a little about how we experience online violence and sexual violence.
So technology is both a force for good and it can be misused. And in the case of violence, what has increasingly happened with the spread of technology, with more and more people being on different apps and media channels, it has also provided an opportunity for a lot of people who hold and harbor misogynistic attitudes to use these medium to perpetrate violence. So any tool can be misused, and in this case, it takes in the form of, you can use a mobile app to track your partner's, stalk your partner and track your partner's movement. You can share pictures of women in the nude without their consent. You can, circulate privately for profit. You can actually, issue rape threats because it's very convenient to do that behind a internet. Sometimes you don't even know if it's a person or a chatbot doing some of these things, right? So it offers an anonymity and an impunity. And also because a lot of these platforms are not always regulated, they're not always moderated, so it allows things to proliferate in a way that one doesn't quite anticipate. And there's a lot of talk now of the manosphere, right? So the manosphere is the online perpetration of misogyny, where men sort of use these online platforms to spread, anti-women views. So these are the ways in which online technology is being used to perpetrate violence against women, and it has become quite quite a prevalent thing, although there is some good data. We do need to do better to measure it. I always say, though, it's important to keep in mind that online violence is a continuation of violence in person. It's not happening in an abstract context.
And as we said, it's a tool, right? It's a tool, but also it's also a tool that we don't know how to use, how to protect from, and people are using this tool at a younger and younger age. So let me just also give you a quick moment. We're going to wrap up soon. Thank you so much. We've got lots of comments coming in, and I can see we have people live from India, Canada, Lesotho, Sri Lanka, that's my own country, UK, Norway, Afghanistan, Sudan. You can see there's a broad range, and I'm sure there's much more. Talk very quickly about, we've said this is not inevitable. So what does WHO do with governments, with communities, with survivors to address this?
So our primary mandate is, of course, to make sure that the health sector is accountable and responding to survivors' needs. And we produce a lot of normative guidelines and tools to make sure that the health sector is doing its bit. We set standards, we provide training materials, we provide job aids to health professionals to make sure that they are providing what we call survivor-centered care, that is centered around empathetic listening, non-judgmental communication, and really respecting the wishes of survivors in terms of what they want to do. But of course, we also want the health system to do some work around data collection because, again, as we discussed earlier,
they're powerful, right?
Yes, data is a powerful advocacy tool. And so we want them to collect data through the health management information systems to record how many women are reporting, what services they are getting. And we are also supporting countries to collect public health data through surveys to make sure that these surveys are actually done in an ethical way that surfaces the problem, because otherwise women have no reason to disclose violence unless we ask questions in a sensitive way and take precautions to make sure that there is confidentiality is maintained. The other thing we are doing is that while the health sector is our primary mandate, we are also gathering data on what the other sectors can do around prevention.
Because it's a complex problem.
It's a complex problem, and we always say health in all policies. So we've published a second edition of a framework called the Respect Framework along with the estimates last week. And this framework has each letter stands for one of 7 strategies. And the idea is to guide policymakers across the different sectors. So what can the education sector do? What can social protection do to empower women? What can legal and justice sectors do? What can community-based organizations, community governments do to change social norms at the community level?
So this is all on our website.
It is all on our website.
So the data is on the website, the reports are on, and all of this is on the website. So speaking about it and educating ourselves about it is really the first step. So Avni, I think we could go on all day because I know how important this is to our audience, but also how important this is to us. For you, it's your daily work. For me, as a survivor of sexual violence, it's very personal, and and I think we should really talk about 2 things now. First of all, all of you are on social media platforms, and you need to be very careful. You need to protect your own digital space, use strong passwords, activate privacy settings, and don't overshare personal details. And becoming savvy about using this tool to stay safe is the first step. The second, I think, whenever you feel uncomfortable about something, tell somebody. If you are a teenager, if you're a child, tell your parent, tell somebody. Report this, report and document anything that you are uncomfortable with. So save screenshots, report to the platform, and if needed, go to law enforcement. If you can also show great solidarity by supporting survivors. When somebody confides you in something like this, please believe them. The default position is you are not taking retaliatory action or legal action, but hold a space and listen to what survivors say. And as Avni was saying, share the resources. So there may be resources in your community, in your city, online. Share those resources and know where to get help and to refer others to get help. So please stay safe online. I want to just finish by saying that we are all wearing orange. Avni is wearing a beautiful orange, and I'm wearing my orange pin today. And Avni, tell us, why are we wearing orange on this day?
So orange was chosen as a color by the campaign organizers because it's a symbol of hope and it's a symbol of solidarity with survivors and with the millions of women who are affected by violence. And one of the campaign slogans is Orange the World. Many buildings all over the world. In Geneva here, the Jet d'eau was actually colored orange on the 25th of November.
And I raise that just to finish because it is prevalent, pervasive, persistent, but violence against women is not inevitable. And let us educate ourselves, let us speak up, let us be supportive, let us find out where resources are, and let us break the societal norms that no longer serve us. Any societal norm that subdues, hurts, harms, belittles anybody should be thrown away. It should be destroyed, and it should never be used as an excuse. There is no excuse for violence against anybody. There's certainly no excuse for violence against women. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's continue this journey together, but let us do it with hope and determination and courage. And thank you for all of you who wrote in and some of you who shared your ideas and your vulnerabilities. Thank you, stay safe, and see you in another social media live soon.